It is the system. The recovery community did not come up with those terms. We're once again acquiescing to the systems at large. Don Coy has also said the system is perfectly designed for the results it's getting.
I totally agree with that.
So why doesn't the recovery movement come together and say, this is our designation? Bill White wrote a book called Recovery Rising. Our movement is big enough and strong enough and powerful enough with enough results to say, system, you respond to us instead of us responding to the little scraps you're throwing us all the time.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
Hey, it's Liz. Thanks for joining us for another episode. We're so glad that you're here and cannot wait to introduce you to our guest today and to hear this passionate conversation. Within this conversation, we discuss the many pathways to recovery, which is one of my very favorite things about the Phoenix and about this podcast. However, I want you to know that we do reference specific substances and substance use in this conversation. And if that doesn't feel safe for you, it is always okay to skip a week and just join us next time. Either way, we're so glad that you're here. Let's get into the show.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of the Rise, Recover, Live podcast. We are your hosts, Bryce III, he, him pronouns.
And Liz McKean, she, her pronouns.
What's going on, Liz? How's your energy?
My energy is still being decided. It's Monday, and it was one of those Mondays that just started off really aggressively, just busy from the very moment I started. So I feel like this is the first time I've paused to even check in. So I'll let you know. TBD.
Aggressive Monday sounds like the name of like a horror film or something like that. Like, somebody need to make that Aggressive Monday.
Yeah, I feel like, well, we got like Sunday scaries is certainly a pretty common term. I don't know if there's like a more alliteration word that we could use. So Aggressive Mondays is an M word. I don't know.
Sunday scaries, Aggressive Mondays. I would be interested in having a conversation with you too about that, maybe on a later date. Because do they still exist? Like I don't experience the Sunday scaries.
Oh, I
That's
sure
a
do.
whole another conversation.
Okay, yeah, pin in it. Gonna come later.
Yeah, put a pin in that. Cool. Cool. So this is where you ask me how's my energy, but you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and just tell you that my energy is perfect and beautiful and wonderful, and I'm feeling uplifted and energized, especially after seeing our guest's shirt today. I'm really feeling real good. Who do we got today, Liz? Today we got a very special person.
I know. We have a bit of a recovery rock star in our midst, and we're super excited. He's just as cool as his shirt appears. Today we have Phil Valentine, who's the executive director of CCAR, which is a recovery organization that I'm sure we're going to hear more about, and definitely a friend to the Phoenix. I think Bryce and I have both been to CCAR conferences. I think Bryce has a little more experience with the organization, like on a more personal level than I do. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes, and could not be more grateful, Phil, for you taking the time to be here. So welcome. And how are you today?
It's a manic Monday. That's just shows
That's
how old I am. The Bangles, right?
It's immediately in my head now, the song. Yeah.
A long time ago. I don't think I'm manic though, but I am grateful actually today to be in recovery still. It's been more than 35 years. I've done it one day at a time, and life has unfolded over those 35 years beyond any dream that I could have possibly had. It is so good. And like my sponsor likes to say, the best is yet to come. And part of that is talking to you two.
That's a beautiful sentiment. I think your sponsor was a little lighter on you. My sponsor is always talking about now the real work begins.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey man, but it's true. It's true. And even hear you say, after, that very long-term number that you put out there that you've been doing this thing intentionally, that, I'm happy to still be here. And I think sometimes, especially when it comes to those numbers, we can kind of rest and prop our shoulder up on that number. Like, man, I got this many years. And really that real work takes place like right now in this moment.
It does. I found recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, my recovery has taken even another upward turn. It's a spiral upwards, just like addiction is a spiral downwards. I believe recovery is a spiral upwards. And I've really started to think about emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and emotional recovery. Even White Bison, our friends over there, Don Coyas talks about the medicine wheel. And there's 4 components. We've all heard about this. There's the physical, there's the mental, there's a spiritual component that recovery embraces, but rarely do we talk about the emotional. And I just think emotional awareness is about self-awareness. And I read this thing about the Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. And she talks about very simply that the way we gain power over an emotion is to simply identify it. And I was never good at identifying emotion. And now we have like feeling wheels going through CCAR and we point, where are you on the feeling wheel? And just because when you identify it, you have control over it and then you can let it go. And my life has become so much more simple when I was started to discover that about my own emotions, still discovering who I am.
That's super duper interesting.
I got a duper.
Nah, because like I feel like that was like for me, I've been on the opposite end of the spectrum. That's been the basis of my recovery is emotion. The reason I would get high, or the reason I would escape, or whatever it was I would use to, will be to get away from the emotion. So the first thing I was smacked upside the head with when I got sober was, here goes these emotions you've been running from. And so I was talking to my homegirl Mila last night, and she was telling me about this piece that she's doing around anxiety. And she was going through it, and she started writing on the canvas, like, I just need to just write, like, what I need to write a breakup letter to, like, anxiety. And so she wrote in detail what it felt like, what the experience was like, and that helped for her to continue this piece. And then the other part of the piece is that she put like a piece of plexiglass over that, but left a space in between the plexiglass and the canvas, symbolizing the space between seeing it and who it is that we are. So allowing for that space, like, gives it less power over us and allows us to have the experience and not be of the experience. And it's like learning like little tips and tricks like that have allowed for me to show up for life on life's term. For sure.
You said so much there, but I just like the way you're talking about emotion and discovering it. When I was addicted, emotions ran everything. And I couldn't even really identify them. I just knew they were intense. What are the 3 emotions that we know about? You know, that everybody talks about? Happy, mad, glad. Or happy, mad, sad. So no, how do you get into all rhyme? Glad, mad, and sad.
There you go.
Right? And that's where most of them fall into. But we are so complex that we do a great disservice to those emotions if we don't identify them more deeply.
Yeah, I think, for me, that's something that I've had to work on a lot in recovery is being able to identify my own emotions, but also identify what emotions maybe don't belong to me that I'm, making up about somebody else, who's in the room with me. Like somebody else seems glad or sad or mad, and, assuming it's about me, assuming that that's something that I need to control or take care of, and then taking that on and feeling that. And that's an area that's been really interesting to look into, knowing that and that I didn't for, 40 years of my life realize that there were a lot of times that I was carrying those emotions that didn't even belong to me.
Are you an empath?
I mean, I don't know. Like I've heard people refer to themselves as that. I've heard people refer to me as that, and I guess it's not a term that I've claimed. But I guess if the definition is that, then
well, there's lots of ways to feel empathy. There's three main ways, but sometimes people actually have the ability to feel what other people are feeling in the room. They
Yeah.
take on other people's energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I'm going to like, cause I used to consider myself an empath.
Mhm.
And then once I did that thing that you're talking about, where it's like you dig in and learn to see, learn to paint with all the colors in the world.
Nice.
Learn to see the spectrum of emotion, and it's not just black and white. It's like, oh, I do have the ability to step into a room and feel what's going on in the room. I do have the ability to show up and feel what's going on in interpersonal relationship and in interpersonal interactions. And I always have to keep just a little pin in it to make sure that I'm not projecting or becoming codependent, because then like I can teeter like, oh, I know what you're going through. I know what you're feeling. And if I don't ask you or get your feedback, then that could just be me projecting. And then there's a bit of ego in that as well. And so like learning to navigate that, because I do have that sensitivity that allows for me to gauge that antenna, that allows for me to pick up those frequencies. But am I a full empath, or am I just projecting because I'm perceiving the world through the way that I see it and assuming that it is without asking? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would say I don't have the ability to feel what other people are feeling, and that has served me well, especially as a recovery coach, because the best recovery coaches are the ones that really understand what's going on. I can put myself in your shoes and you can describe to me, and I can get an understanding and relate to it, but I'm not actually going to take on your emotion. I've never really been able to do that. People that take on other people's emotion into the codependence, that can be their greatest blessing and their curse, because that can be very heavy at times. So you really have to learn how to manage that. Bryce, it sounds like you've learned how to manage that.
It's a practice. You meet new people, you enter in new circumstances and new contexts, and I like to look at my ability to show up no longer as hardware but as software. Like I can get downloads now, and when I take those downloads, I can have updates, and I can meet people, and it's like, oh, you are this type of human, and this is how I show up for you. And because there's a level, what the mind does is it automatically gets rid of the stuff that we feel that we don't need, because like if we had to wake up and learn how to do everything all over again every day, life would just be super cumbersome and we wouldn't get anything done. So when I see a tree, the first time I saw a tree, maybe it was amazing, but the next couple of times I see a tree, and now I'm 34, I've seen thousands of trees. I see a tree, I label it a tree, and I just walk by. But this tree that I'm seeing right now is an individual tree, and there's different distinctions about this tree, unlike any other tree. And to keep the metaphor going, but to transfer it to humans are different too. And so that's what's allowed for me to be able to show up and build to and contribute to community, is by taking that second to stop and be present in this specific interaction, because this human, even if they show similarities to other humans that I've had interactions with, this human is in this space right now, and this is unique. Does that make sense?
It does. So when you look at that new tree, do you still get to the point of, wow, this tree is amazing? Like you did at the first one you saw?
Yeah, no, that's the practice. That's the practice, because that autopilot kicks in. That's what's automatic.
I think we do that a lot of times with people, right? We say, just another person. However, every person is so phenomenal and wired so differently, and there's similarities and differences. I think 20 plus years here at CCAR and training coaches are trained to see people and explore who they are and what makes them tick, and what does recovery look like for you. And when we started asking that question, the answers we're getting these days are just remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable.
Even on that tip, like, because I feel we could talk about like all of these things for an hour or two or three.
We could.
But like for those listening that aren't necessarily familiar with recovery coaching and how that contributes to the recovery space, or CCAR as an organization, Can you give us like a rundown, like somebody's listening that doesn't know what any of those things are?
Dude, that's like a 7-hour question. So do you want me to pull out the PowerPoint and all that?
The little bullet points.
Yeah. But we do have let's talk about recovery coaching first. And we really designed recovery coaching so our volunteers could meet people as they came into recovery community centers. And I'll give you the basics of it. We asked 2 questions. There's 2 key questions. How can I help you with your recovery today? And what does recovery look like for you? All right. So I'm not telling you to recover in one way. I'm not going to say the way I recovered is the way everyone should recover. That how you recover is up to you. And we train coaches to actively listen, ask good questions, discover your own stuff, and treat the person like a resource, like they're the best resource on their lives. And that's what we train people to do. But I started in CCAR CCAR stands for the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. In January of 1999, I was the first hire and have been executive director now for the last 20 plus years. We run recovery community centers. We have coaches in the emergency departments. We have coaches in all the prison and parole offices. I'm just talking in Connecticut. We're in the jail diversion program. We do telephone recovery support. We have a whole branch that puts a face on recovery to show that recovery is real. And then we have a lot of people who train others, especially in recovery coaching. And let me just give you one statistic that in the emergency department, we have coaches go in and meet people where they are. And we started this about 6 years ago, but last month, we saw 564 people in the emergency department, new people that met a coach who sat down with them and said, "Hey, you're here with an addiction. You asked to see a recovery coach. How can I help you?" You know what? These people know what to do. They're not like, it's not like they're clueless. I don't know how I ended up here in the emergency department. They pretty sure they have a problem and they're pretty sure on what the next step is. They just might need some encouragement or some help. And the last little story to that is when we started this program, well, I can even go back further because my first sponsor was Smokey the cab driver. And back in 1987, he handed me a beeper. Bryce, you know what a beeper is?
Yeah. I've heard the things of legend.
Yeah, he handed me a beeper and says, when that goes off, answer it. So at 2 a.m, the very first day I got one, it just flashed a number across the screen. So I called the number. It was Rockville General Hospital Emergency Department. We have a live one, Phil. Can you come down and help? And I was like, well, okay. And, talked to the people and calmed them down, gave them an option or two. I told that story for about 15 years as executive director. And finally, the state heard it and said, we ought to fund that. And they gave us some seed money. And we have 32 emergency departments in Connecticut. We're in 31 now. We started in 4, 31. And I had never thought that I would see the time where an emergency department coach went and saw somebody in the emergency department who got into recovery, who came to our recovery community center, started taking recovery coach training, applied for a job, and now works as a recovery coach in the emergency department. And we have 3 of them. That's remarkable.
So
that's recovery in a nutshell. That's just like extraordinary.
Man, and exactly where it needs to be. Like it's just, man. I mean, I've been that person in the emergency room and had, a social worker or someone come in and just, kind of demand, like, what did you do? What did you drink? How much did you drink? And then have the eyes wide, if I told even a little bit of the truth, and immediately like, whoa, don't do that. Nope, start to lie again, and just go back out and just continue down that downward spiral. So to have someone that's there, and I love that the question is, what can I do to help your recovery today?
Right.
Like not, like let's just start with where that starting where you're at is just something that when you're in it, you're in that spiral and you can't just focus on what is this step, because everything just feels so enormous and completely out of reach. So that is that's amazing. Lucky Connecticut.
Well, I think the state, Bob Savage, who founded CCAR, worked for the state for 30 years. And he wanted to know if the recovery community could be organized. And then we could advocate for issues of importance to the recovery community. So we started out as an advocacy organization, putting a face on recovery. And then we dove into service about 4 or 5 years into it. But it was not in the clinical treatment world. It was in the recovery support world. We help people maintain and sustain recovery. That's our strength. That's our wheelhouse. I've heard many people say, well, it's just like treatment, or it's not, because if you tore up your knee playing a sport, like my son Joshua did, he had to go have surgery. He never would have returned to the athletic field if he didn't have physical therapy, right? So treatment is like the surgery for an addiction, and recovery support services is like the physical therapist. It's there for as long as you need it, and as long as you want to strengthen your recovery. It's a whole different field. And I've been saying that for years and years as well. I don't know how well we're doing, but I keep saying it. I'll just keep saying it.
Yo, Bryce the Third here, popping on before we get this episode started to let you know of some cool stuff we got coming up. August 10th, from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are going to be doing our very first live podcast virtually. This will be a program that you can register for right now in the Phoenix app. You'll get the notification before the event starts, and then you just pop onto the Phoenix app and join. We're going to be having a live conversation guided by our special guest, you. We'll be building community, answering questions, and sharing stories in real time. And I cannot tell you how excited I am about it. So open up your Phoenix app right now, go register for that program, and don't just register, show your butt up. We usually crack 500 downloads an episode, and I really want to see each and every one of you. Bring your mama, tell your cousin, bring the kids, put them on your lap, and let's rise and recover live. Ooh, I've been wanting to say that. All right, let me let you go so you can enjoy today's episode. What is the difference between recovery coaching and 12-step? I have my own viewpoints, but I'm curious to hear from you what the difference between 12-step and recovery coaching is.
Simply put, that the recovery coach operates over multiple pathways of recovery, of which 12 steps is just one. So my basis in my personal recovery is 12-step recovery, right? That's how I maintained this for 35 years. But if I was a recovery coach and I said, Bryce, you have to recover in 12 steps, and that's the only way you can recover, how successful would I be?
It wasn't for me.
Not if you're a coach. Yeah.
Right. So my personal pathway is one of abstinence, 12-step base, faith in a higher power. That higher power, I've said, for me, is my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Now, if I said, Liz, you had to follow that pathway to get sober, otherwise you're doomed to death and destruction, how successful would I be?
Well, that was said to me, and I was pretty doomed for a little while.
All right. So now, but knowing that that's my pathway, me personally, do you believe that I can support others in pathways that are different than mine?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right? And the other part is, just because you recover differently than I do does not make that a threat to me personally. And a lot of people get very threatened if someone says, well, I'm going to go hike a mountain once a month and smoke a blunt up there and get high and be one with nature. But then you look like he's maintaining his job. His family loves him. He's successful. He's well adjusted. Could I go up to the top of that mountain and smoke a blunt?
It's like,
probably not. It might be a little tempting, but I choose not to do that today. About the closest I get is my mud water, mushrooms, coffee in the morning. That stuff's so good. But anyway, it's not a threat to me. I'm more curious. Tell me how that's working. What was that experience like? What do you find out of that? What works for you? Talk to me about it. Be curious. I'd rather see people be curious about things than condemn it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much here. Because like I think for me, like this is where that seed was planted. So I'm a CPRM, certified peer recovery mentor, certified through McBAP and CCAR and all that good stuff. Becoming a coach was a turning point for me, where like my foundation for my recovery is 12-step. And that's what's allowed for me to maintain this, still does. And having had the experience of working with an individual through 12-step and turning them away because, they wanted to know, could they smoke a little weed? They wanted to know, could they sell a little weed? They wanted to know.
I don't know. Can you? That's the question. You tell me.
But the way it was given to me was like I had to give it how it was given to me. That's how it was shown to me through 12 steps. So it's like I can't give you something that wasn't given to me. I can just show you what was given to me, how it was given to me. Then when I came into coaching, if somebody approached me and was like, yeah, I'm smoking a little weed, but I'm trying to stop drinking. And it's like, okay, well, now that we've identified that you want to stop drinking, like, well, how can I help you to be able to do so?
Right.
And it was like, like multiple pathways. There's, and the biggest question was, is there an improvement in the quality of life? And it's like, yes, there is. It's like, okay, well, we're working on it. And that really shifted. That we started out with empathy. That really shifted my ability to be able to have compassion for people that recover in a way other than I found recovery, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does.
And it allowed for, like you said, for me to be able to land and be a bit more secure and open in the conversation with myself around what my recovery looked like. Because my recovery doesn't have to look like yours and mine is not based off of how yours is. And I've had experience with people in recovery that like will grab you by the collar if you don't do it how they do it, and you could tell their recovery is a bit threatened by other people doing recovery different than them.
Right.
And, recovery is life on life's terms for real. So like I should be able to show up no matter what life brings, and life brings variety of people in color and recovery pathways, and I should be able to still be able to show up and be strong in the way that I recover. So this was the seed.
I came up this idea of a tapestry of recovery instead of just a pathway. It's like you're on one pathway, but a tapestry of recovery is much more colorful, and you just use that word. So let's say like the foundation of my recovery is 12 steps. That's royal blue. So I had a lot of royal blue at the bottom of my tapestry as I grew. And then I started to add things like a silvery gold thread of spirituality that blossomed into all kinds of yellows and bright lights. And now I have green for nature and other blues for water. But it just explodes into color, and we can add to the tapestry any way we like. And the other word I pushed back on that you used is peer. And peer is used everywhere in the recovery support service field, in the recovery movement. I cannot stand it. I cannot stand it.
Please tell us why.
The first reason is because the rest of the world doesn't know what it's about. So when you tell people what is a peer, most people say it's someone the same age. The class of 77 from Manchester High School, we're all peers because we're all about the same age and grew up in the same town. Some people might say it has to do with a profession or whatever. It's a little shaky there. So, Bryce, you said you were a peer recovery specialist.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as peer recovery? But I'll let you think about that. What happens, though, is I've heard too many times over many, many years that just pisses me off is the system says something along the lines, but they veil it in carefully chosen words. They're just a peer.
What
do they know? They're just a peer. Why do we use that? So why did we come up with recovery coach? Because that's what we do. We coach recovery. There's no such thing as a peer recovery. I have no idea what that is. And I don't know what a specialist is as far as that goes either. So it's all BS as far as I'm concerned. And when they use the term peer, we don't have, the implication is no education, no real training. All they have is lived experience, because that's how peer gets translated. And so we're seen as less than. We're not seen as professional. And I switched 180 degrees when there was a time in my career I said, nobody will call me a professional. Well, now we have a designation called Recovery Coach Professional. And that has made all the difference in the emergency department and the Department of Correction, because we're coming in as coaches and we're professional. We dress that way, we act that way, and we're competent. Because the other thing is, am I making my point yet? But the other thing is, when you say peer recovery, they assume all you have is lived experience. But that's just one factor in the entire coaching helping field. You have to have a lot of other skills. If you want to identify that so you can relate to somebody about your story and telling your story, okay, but that's not really the aim. We have way more skills than just being a peer. So how dare we pigeonhole ourselves into this tiny little box that this is the only skill we have because we call ourselves peers? All right, rant over.
Well, I have just a little bit of challenge to that, just a little bit. I agree with everything you're saying. And I think, the recovery coaching and everything, all those areas that you're describing, the way that recovery coaches and anyone that's working to help, in this area that has those skills and has that training, there needs to be that recognition from emergency departments, from other settings, governmental things, all those things for sure. But when I'm picturing a person, I'm picturing myself as just so afraid and so ashamed and so unsure of what's available to me. When I hear when I hear professional, when I hear anything that has a clinical sound, that can feel unattainable. But if I hear a peer, that's something we've talked about in the Phoenix as I'm a peer in recovery. I have had this lived experience, and that might just be my very first step. That might be the first person I'm able to say out loud, this is an experience I'm having. All I need to know is that you've had that experience too. I might not want somebody who's going to tell, I'm afraid you're going to try to tell me what to do. I just need to say it out loud for the first time. So that as a very first step can feel powerful to me.
So what's that got to do with the word peer?
That's just the word that for me felt like you are someone who's had the experience that I've had. That's the identification without some of the other language that could feel scary.
Okay. But we've never heard that. Never heard that in any of our interactions about, and I think for me, that's just a fear-based approach.
Yeah.
Because it's not what you call yourself when you walk into the room. It's who you are. And when you talk about lived experience, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you just sit down and you're present and you care, that you could be educated through the wazoo, have all these degrees and be intimidating as heck, and I could have all those degrees. I could sit down on the same level next to you in your bed and say, Liz, I'm concerned for you. I care about you. How can I help you?
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to do that. I might say, I've been in this bed too, in the same exact position. I've never used peer, because that also isolates the rest of us from the rest of the world. I just think but anyway, we don't have to change anybody's opinion. I'm just, Bryce opened this can of words. And, I opened the can, but he said, explain yourself. So
no, I'm so glad that you did. Thank you. And thanks for that response too. Cause I think those are cool conversations, because words really do matter, and like to have that strong of a stance on it and to stick to it, I think is powerful. And yeah, I appreciate that.
So what do you think? What do you think the industry are they embracing? Because the reason I said I'm a certified peer recovery mentor is because that is my that's my letters.
Who gave it to you?
CCAR.
Yeah, exactly. Who gave it to you?
McBath?
No,
I thought it was CCAR.
I know, but who was the accrediting body? Who gave you that? So who's is it? Was it the state?
Yeah, it was the state
certification board.
Yeah, through McBath. So, Michigan Certification of Addiction
Professionals. Of course, of addiction professionals, not even recovery professionals. So this agency that says we're professionals in getting people treated addicted. Addiction professional. That's what we were when we were dealing drugs. We were addiction professionals. They are going to keep you, Bryce, in your little box because we're just going to make you a certified peer recovery specialist or whatever. It's the system keeping people in boxes.
Man, I was really hoping Phil would come here and tell us how he really feels. I'm so
I like Phil. I'm really liking Phil. We about to kick the door down in the system.
It is the system. The recovery community did not come up with those terms. We're once again acquiescing to the systems at large. Don Coy has also said the system is perfectly designed for the results it's getting.
I totally agree with that.
So why doesn't the recovery movement come together and say, this is our designation? Bill White wrote a book called Recovery Rising. Our movement is big enough and strong enough and powerful enough with enough results to say, system, you respond to us instead of us responding to the little scraps you're throwing us all the time. Anyway, I'm done. Nope.
That's crazy. You got me fired up because, as a matter of fact, McBath sent back my renewal for my certification because I didn't meet the criteria for working in recovery. But it's like my entire life is working in recovery, like working with people in recovery. That's all I do in life. So yeah, I think there's some notches in the system. I think there's some glitches.
So you have to renew your certification. Let me ask you, what does that certification get you personally?
Nothing right now.
So
I'm not actively coaching.
Did you get hired because you had that certification?
I did at one point.
And then so who was able to bill for that certification?
That organization.
What kind of organization was it?
It was RCO.
Was it? Okay. Yeah. So a lot of times it's follow the dollars. And Bryce, you got me all like. So
Phil's leaning
you get your certification, right? You passed a written test, right? You filled in all the little dot bubbles and you guessed right or whatever, or you actually knew your stuff. Does the system have any idea, Bryce, if you're any good with people?
Not the system.
Right, because that's the way the certification system is designed. You take a paper test. Does that have anything with your people, anything to do at all with your people ability? So it's just a mechanism, a poor one at that, for the provider to get paid for your services. Nobody really cares if you're any good at it. And that's me being really cynical. And they think more training, more certification is the answer to better quality. No, the answer to better quality is better hiring practices, is to know who you are and then let the organizations figure that out and bill for the service whether or not you have a credential. So I think credentialing is just absolute BS. So we had to figure out a way to vet coaches, because we know there's some coaches that aren't any good. They're going to tell everybody 12 steps is the only way or the highway. I'm not going to coach you. You're out. So we actually put people through an interview process to get their recovery coach professional by a panel of their peers. And they just want to ask you questions, run you through scenarios, see how you respond. Isn't that a better way to assess whether someone has the skill?
So how does somebody get that certification? How does somebody become a recovery coach professional?
Of course, we charge like $17,000 and able to take the test. You take some minimal training. There's like 46 hours of CCAR training, Recovery Coach Academy, the ethical considerations, then 14 hours of your own time. And then you submit your application and you sit down with the panel, and it can be Zoom, it can be in person. That's mostly in Zoom these days. And we just run you through the scenarios. And just like we're having a conversation, we'd ask you to respond to this scenario. What would you do? What would you say? What are you thinking?
So is this certification nationally recognized? Like you can coach anywhere in the nation with the certification?
Dude, you can you're a coach when you say you are. I mean, you can anybody. It's the Wild West out there. You can hang a shingle right now and say, "I'm a recovery coach," and people do, and they coach people. We want to make it. Our goal is to make it the gold standard of recovery coaching. As a matter of fact, I was just over in Qatar, and we did 12 interviews for the recovery coach professional designation, and 10 people passed. 2 did not. And they were really good people. So now I can say we have coaches in England. We're international. That's what people do, right? They say, well, we're international because we have one person overseas somewhere.
Hey, it's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, so I know, because I already know there's somebody listening, because that was big for me. When I got sober, I was working at an automotive plant. I'm here in Detroit, so one of the big 3, and that had absolutely nothing to do with my spiritual, personal alignment. Like I was just there for a check, and then now these big questions as to like, well, what do I want to do? Were popping up. There were a couple of other answers to it, but one thing that I was led to was like, oh, like working in recovery is a thing. Like I can actually like work in this field and help people and like do it professionally. And so like I know there are people listening to this podcast episode like, yo, like this sounds like way up my alley. How do I get involved? What does that look like for me? How do I begin to spearhead this as a professional career? And so like, what do you say to those people that are listening?
The recovery field is brand new and blossoming. I think we face some barriers coming in. We're getting absorbed by the treatment industry, and they're about initiating recovery, and many of them do it really, really well. But the recovery field is about maintaining and sustaining recovery. The other caution is that the mental health world is looking to take all this addiction recovery and pull it under mental health. I mean, it's even, if you even look at our federal government, it's Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. So we're even stigmatized at the federal level because it's easy to abuse the abuser. It's not substance use or substance recovery, and it's not mental illness, it's mental health. So, and at least in my experience here in Connecticut, mental health has always felt like they were superior to us people in recovery from an addiction. And the thing that drives me, you guys are like picking at all my little like pushing my buttons here.
Happy accident.
Yeah, right. Is like lately I can't, is everybody's in recovery from something. Have you heard that?
Oh, you and Bryce are going to be able to talk about this.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? So you're in recovery from something, whatever that may be, but we were out there on the verge of death with our addiction, and you're going to minimize my recovery because everybody's in recovery from something. And the other thing is, everybody in recovery has a mental health issue. Everybody in recovery has a mental illness. It's all the same. We all recover the same way. Well, people in recovery from addiction, you look at people in 20 years of recovery, the system wants you out of it, right? They're designed to kick you out of the system. The mental health industry is designed to keep you in it. And they'll do that for as long as they possibly can, whether it was the age-old institutions. Now they chain you with medication and keep you shackled that way. Some people need a lifetime of medication, just like people in addiction recovery, but the system is designed to keep you in it. The system is perfectly designed for results you're getting. Thank God that my recovery in addiction, that after I was free. I never went to any type of treatment or any system. I went to therapy for as long as I determined I needed it. And I explored all those options. Addiction recovery, the vast majority of people I've seen in long-term recovery have a deep faith, a deep spirituality that seems to be missing on the other side. So there's all these differences that I've been talking about for years that we refuse to acknowledge. People have been trying to put the systems together for decades and decades and decades. And it's always the next generation that thinks, oh, we're going to get it right. We're going to put these together. I wrote a piece called Oil It in Water. Sometimes they just aren't meant to be integrated. Oh boy, here we go. Let the comments flow now. Phil's at it again. Good thing the old guy's going to retire soon. He's out.
Oh my gosh. No, I think it's so important to call that out because it's one of those things that it's easy to, from without digging into all the like really granular pieces of it, to be like, well, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm like, I have clinical anxiety and my, drinking was very much attached to that until they became completely different beasts and monsters. But like, there's definitely like an integration that, and the stigma within, mental illness and the stigma with substance use disorder. For me, I felt much freer, much sooner to talk about my, mental health diagnoses than I did to talk about my substance use disorder. That took longer, and I held a lot more shame around it. So the concept of like mental health kind of being an umbrella that includes substance use disorder is something that I guess my initial knee-jerk reaction would be like, oh, good, because the stigma there is maybe starting to decrease. So maybe we can maybe that will allow the stigma to decrease here. And I understand what you're saying, because if that means it becomes just completely meshed in as if it's all the same thing, I mean, that doesn't benefit anybody, because I mean, even within mental health, like there's no one, one pathway, one treatment. Everybody's got their own tapestry there.
Liz, how do you identify now you're in recovery from what?
I am in recovery from substance use disorder, and I am a person with clinical anxiety and panic disorder.
And that's how you, like, if you're going to speak in a public setting, that's what you would say?
I tell it to the person who checks me out at the grocery store. Like, my name is, I'm just kidding. I am not a person who participates in 12-step. Like, I've, been certainly to meetings in the past, but it's just not that wasn't my main pathway. And part of that is because I didn't like the word alcoholic. I didn't like having to be told how to introduce myself in that way. It didn't feel good. It kept me feeling a lot of shame. Yeah. So I'll talk about those things, when it comes up. That's the way I talk about it. It was a lot of words.
Everybody's wired differently, because I would have felt, because I was diagnosed probably 20 years into recovery. Somebody said I had social anxiety when I was a kid. That's why I drank. But of course, that was a mental health professional that gave me that diagnosis. So I think my world, I think there's more stigma around mental health issues than there is in addiction recovery.
That's interesting.
It is interesting because we all perceive it differently. Yeah. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what I hear you, with very much passion fighting against, is like anybody putting anything in a box, because you're talking about humans, and we just don't fit.
Historically, it was the mental health professionals that, performed lobotomies on alcoholics. And things like that. So even today, you can go in with a drug issue, and if you're good at hiding it, like it sounds like you were, you're going to get prescribed mental health medication. And a lot of people who are addicted know exactly what they're doing to go in and get their meds and know what to say and how to behave. And it's just, we live in a whacked out world right now. But
it's getting better. I think we're here talking about it, and that makes me feel good. Go ahead, Bryce. Sorry. Phil, so I want to pivot us slightly just because I want to make sure that we're respecting your time. And there's an area that I really wanted to ask you about if you're up for talking about it. We just recently had somebody on that, I don't know the order of when we'll publish these, but he's about to embark on 4 months on the Pacific Trail.
Pacific Crest Trail.
And I know that you had a similar experience that was pretty life-changing within the past, within the past decade. Was it
2015?
I knew the year, but I don't know what year it is now. So that's where my math was struggling. So I would just love to hear about that, and just how that was for you personally.
Yeah, so I hiked the entire length of the Appalachian Trail in 2015 to put a face on recovery. It was in response to being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer of the tongue. And as I was recovering from a very aggressive chemo and radiation regimen, I heard a call. It was literally as clear as day. I want you to hike the Appalachian Trail. And to me, that was God calling me on an epic adventure. So I planned for 4 or 5 years. And on March 19th, 5 years from the day I was diagnosed, I stood on Springer Mountain, Georgia, the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, touched the first white blaze and broke into tears, because my goal was never to finish the Appalachian Trail. My goal was to start. And so through all kinds of trials and tribulation, I found myself on September 23rd, 2015 on Mount Katahdin in Maine, 2,189.2 miles later, on my 55-year-old body, having completed a thru-hike. And in some ways, I released the book. It's on Amazon. It's called Continue, Right Click on the Appalachian Trail. My trail name was Right Click because my right knee clicked going uphill. But I look back on, I was just reading a little bit of the book. I look back on it and I'm just in much awe that I did it as anybody else, because a life on the Appalachian Trail on a thru hike like that is literally a microcosm of recovery. It's what you do each and every day. It's living simply. It's continuing. It's repeating. But it's also living in just union with a higher power. And when I was out there in solitude, not isolation, I hiked with people, but you were often alone, hiking through nature, with God, you can't help but be transformed. I came back from the trail and we were at a certain budget here at CCAR. We were about probably 15, 20 employees. And 7 years later, our budget had quadrupled and we're up to 70 employees. And it all due because I became a much more patient, thoughtful, connected leader focused on organizational culture, the peoples that work here, their health, the people we serve, their recovery. And I became much more grounded. So I became even a better leader. So if anybody ever has the opportunity to take a long walk, I strongly encourage it. And if you want to read about it, the book is available on Amazon.
It's amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely link that in the show notes because I'm sure folks will want to learn more. Thanks for talking about that.
I too have a question and really want to respect your time. And we'll be seeing you soon. So when we see you, I'll have more time to pull you to the side and ask you some questions. But putting a face on recovery, what do you think is the importance of giving recovery a face. There are programs of anonymity that have helped people for generations, and those play a huge role in the recovery space. What do you think is the importance
Mhm.
of putting that anonymity to the side and saying how my name is it, and this is me, and being loud and proud about it and being open?
Well, first of all, the 12 steps never said you had to be anonymous, right? As far as talking about your recovery. You can talk about your recovery and not say you were in recovery from a 12-step program, right? I've already
Mhm.
violated that, but over the years, the AA police have only come to my door a few times, so I'm not overly concerned about that. And it's also
What is that uniform?
yeah, they were also concerned about the early stages of somebody very popular getting into recovery and relapsing and thinking that the program
Hmm.
was not effective. So I think we've passed that with the millions of members of 12 step meetings. I do believe in the spiritual humility associated with not, you know, talking about that. So there's also that component. But when we put our face in, I mean, Marty Mann was the first female alcoholic. She started the National Council on Alcoholism. So people knew she was in recovery. Just read the history about that. Um, Bill White talks about, you know, like how whole communities get infected with like addiction, like it can run rampant through a whole community. Bill White talks about the same thing. It can happen with recovery. Recovery is contagious. We need recovery carriers. People don't know how many people are in recovery till they actually see people in recovery talking about their recovery, demonstrating that recovery is real and it's possible. If we're always hidden in basements, in literally basements, and it never comes out into the light and into the community, how will people know about it? I certainly didn't know. I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous when I was out there, and I don't even know how. But we just want to make recovery visible, that it's embraced by people, that they know where to go. I think over the last 25 years, we've come so far. The Phoenix has helped a lot with this too, come so far in making recovery acceptable. That in some ways that, you know, you talk about celebrities in long-term recovery, they're almost admired.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's almost like, yeah, that's cool. It's not a big deal one way or another. And that's what we got to continue to do, to normalize recovery, that it takes a supreme effort. I wrote one piece too about the casserole effect, and Tom Kirk, God rest his soul, told me this. Wouldn't it be amazing that when somebody went away to treatment for their addiction, that neighbors brought them casseroles?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was getting my cancer treatment, Sandy had her freezer filled with people from church filling it with casseroles because that's what you do in the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood. Hasn't happened too often when people go away to treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be an indication as well. But the more people know about recovery, the more likely it is to take hold and become contagious. I'm not saying that everyone has to tell that they're in recovery. It's for those who feel called to do it. And if you're called to do it, I encourage you. Over 25 years at CCAR, I've told my story countless times, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows I'm in recovery. I've received no kickback or anything that was even remotely damaging about it. So, but then again, it's my mission, it's my purpose, right? To talk about recovery and to coach recovery. So I'm sticking to it.
Seems to be going well, and
Mhm.
we're better because you're part of it. And I agree. I think it's surprising how much, and I've experienced this myself and heard it from countless people, that like when they start talking about it, how much the proverbial casseroles start to come in, and it's like
Mhm.
all like the people are so much more supportive than you might expect them to be. Those who aren't, it's like, good to know, good to know, bye. And it's just shocking how many people will come out of the woodwork to say me too, and it's really an incredible community that you're unlocking in that way. So I agree.
We're all unlocking it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Phil. This has been one of my favorite interviews in a while. It's been very entertaining.
You're such a button pusher, Bryce.
You're my favorite type of person, that's for sure. Before we get out of here, one last question. If you could find, or if you could run into any iteration of Phil within your life and tell that version of Phil anything, what iteration of Phil would you grab and what would you tell?
Well, it's probably the 13-year-old Phil that went to the middle school dance, and he had a 6-pack of Maximus Super Beer and a quart of Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine.
Oh my goodness, not the Boone's Farm.
All because he wanted to, and he saw these girls, and there was Marlene, and she was looking fine. And I walked right up to her and I asked her to dance, and we were having the time of our life right up to the point where I threw up on her shoes. So I would have probably told Phil, hey, skip that whole quart of Boone's Farm,
You told Marlene to take a step back.
Yeah.
Boone's Farm ain't never did nobody any good.
No story ends well. Oh my goodness.
No, but and I think overall though is don't get, and I've never been much of a worrier, but the times I worried, I would just say, just remember the best is yet to come. And I would also say, when I was really young and my body was a lot better than it is now, enjoy life, Phil. Don't take things so seriously. Enjoy life.
Wise words. And this version of Bryce is soaking them in. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, well, looks like we did it, Liz.
I think we did it. Yeah, and we're gonna put some links in the show notes. I know, Phil, you've mentioned quite a few like things that you wrote, and obviously CCAR has a website. But if you'd like to say anything about where folks can find you or find more about you or about CCAR, please feel free to share.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's just CCAR.us. And again, the book is Continue. Right click on the Appalachian Trail, available on Amazon.
Amazing. And if someone is not in Connecticut, is there still benefit for them connecting with CCAR?
Oh, yeah. There's training resources. We share annual reports. We do technical assistance all over the country, all over the world. So get in touch with us.
Heck yeah. Yeah, neither Bryce nor I are in Connecticut. We've both been able to be, parts of the community in some ways. And it's been incredible because it is an incredible community of very passionate people with all different stories.
Just like the Phoenix, maybe?
So similar. We should be buddies.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you for taking this time and for being your authentic, passionate self. That's exactly what we always hope for. And just, thank you enough.
Yeah, I was really nervous. Could you tell?
Just behind the scenes, pulling back the curtain. This is when I think this might be the only episode Bryce had to pause us to be like, just don't bang on the table quite so hard with those passionate statements, which maybe is my favorite thing ever. So again, thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for listening. We are just so beyond grateful for you. Like, there's not even words to say how grateful we are. If you haven't already, in whatever app you are listening to this podcast, if it's possible to hit follow or that little plus sign in the top right corner so that you don't miss a single episode. It makes a really big difference, both for us and hopefully for you, because you don't miss anything. Also, if you're able to rate and review us, that makes a difference too. So folks can be excited about what they're getting into. send this episode to a friend who it will be meaningful for. I can't imagine who it wouldn't be. And Bryce, can they get in touch with us, with you and me?
Oh yeah, they can get in touch with us. They got to go to Connecticut though, and then when they get to Connecticut, you go on to the App Store, download the Phoenix app, gives you access to the community of the Phoenix, tons and tons and tons of program, as well as other people seeking connectivity and connection. And there are community groups within that app. One of those community groups is the Rise, Recover, Live podcast community group. Pop in there, come say hey to me and Liz. Hopefully we get Phil in there.
Mm-hmm.
Come say hey to him.
I think I am.
Come let us know what it is you like about this episode, what it is you didn't like about this episode. Do you agree with the passion of Phil? Are there some things that you disagree with? Come, let's have this dialogue. Let's talk about it. This is how we evolve. Come to the app store, get the app, hop in a community group within the app, and that's how you can contact with us.
Yes, please do. I think we actually might have some cool things going on with CCAR in the app too, so definitely hop in there so you don't miss that.
That is true. There are.
Yay. Amazing. Well, we will see you next week, everybody. Thank you for being with us. We couldn't do this without you, and we sure wouldn't want to. We will see you next time.
Catch you later.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.